Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Janine Mason. I'm the founder and executive director of the Fieldstone Leadership Network San Diego. And on behalf of our partner, the Nonprofit Institute at the University of San Diego, I'm pleased to welcome you today to our webinar on adaptive leadership. As we get started today, I want to share with you some tips on how to make the most of your experience with us today. If you're having any technical difficulties, you may email Cynthia. Her email address is right there on your screen, or you may contact Cynthia using the chat box, and she'll be with us all throughout the whole session. So if you have any problems at all, feel free to reach out to Cynthia at any time. Everyone on our call today is muted. So if you have questions, which we'll be entertaining today, please put those in the Q&A box, which you'll find at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And if you have resources that you'd like to share with our community today, please add those in chat and we will collect all of those. We will also put resources that we talk about during the webinar in the chat function as well. We'll stay on after the call for about 10 minutes today to make sure that we're able to answer all of the questions that you have. We are recording this session, and the recording, along with any resources that we refer to or that we collect, will be available on both the Fieldstone Leadership Network website and the Nonprofit Institute's website, and both of those addresses are on your screen at this moment. One other thing that I would like to share with you, this is a two-part series, and it is on adaptive leadership. And we want to be really good examples of the work that we're saying is important, and so we are being adaptive, and we have made a decision to change the Friday session to Thursday. Many of you may know that Friday is the celebration of Juneteenth, and out of respect for that holiday, we have moved the Friday session to Thursday. It will be Thursday at noon. We hope that all of you can join us, and if you are not able to, it will be posted, as I've said, on our websites. For those of you that may have made a donation, and we thank you for that, if you're not able to join us and you want a refund, please contact Cynthia and we'll make sure to take care of that for you. But our hope is that all of you will still be able to join us on Thursday, and we thank you for your understanding of the decision that we've made to adjust our calendar. As I shared with you, Lynn and Laura will stay on with you for about 10 minutes after the webinar today. That's just a little bit of extra time for those of you who may have some pressing questions. If you are not able to get those done within the hour time frame, we'll set aside that extra time for you. And now it is my pleasure to introduce to you my partner in crime, Laura Dietrich.
Hi, how are you? And thank you all for joining us today. This wraps up the first part of a series of webinars that we've been doing in partnership with Fieldstone Leadership Network. So thank you, Janine, for your partnership on that. At the Nonprofit Institute, we focus heavily on, as many of you may know, leadership development, organizational capacity building, and research and evaluation. And everything we do derives from our research. And some of you have probably seen our studies that we've released on COVID-19, and you've participated, I hope. I'd like to tell you what we do with those studies is when we get that information from nonprofit leaders, we turn around and we think about our programming and we respond accordingly to meet your needs. But at the same time, we share broadly and widely and basically talk to anyone who will listen about the needs of nonprofit leaders. So I appreciate any of your participation in the last two surveys that we've done on COVID-19. They're available on our website and have a lot of information inside them. Cynthia, if you could please advance to the next slide. So ultimately, our initial foray into studying what's going on the ground found a variety of capacity support needs expressed by nonprofit leaders, and taking collectively and looking at all the qualitative responses, I think this idea about adapting and managing anxiety in a really complex and quickly changing environment became really quite evident to us. And so today we've asked, the subject matter expert on this topic, and a colleague of mine, Lynn Corbett, who is the Director of Governance and Community Initiatives in the Nonprofit Institute, to help us think differently about leadership and adaptive capacity and change and anxiety and all of those good topics. So people love Lynn. We were on a call last week where somebody wrote in the chat, Lynn, I wish you could just get plugged into my ear so I could listen to you all the time. So I think at the end of this, you all might feel the same way. So without further ado, Lynn, I'm going to hand this over to you. Thank you.
Okay, so welcome everybody. Excited to see you all. This is going to be, a day of having conversations about, difficult topics, in particularly, what does it mean to be an adaptive organization? As they mentioned, it's a two-part series. So the first part is going to be about the organization. Then the second part is going to be about the adaptive individual and or the adaptive leader. Right? So we can talk about what it means to be an adaptable organization, but if you don't understand adaptive leadership from an individual perspective, it makes it a little bit harder as well. I will have some time at the end for questions, but if things are coming up and you feel free to put them in the boxes, and then we'll deal with them as they can. I will try and go through as much as possible. I'll try and take my time with it. If you need some clarifying, feel free again to ask the questions. And then at the end, I'm going to cover something about change and what does it mean to implement change. And I'm going to introduce a change process to you. So it's an adaptable organization. Now you have these ideas or information that comes out of it. Well, then how do you move the change process along? So it's kind of like a two-part here, and I think it's going to be important. And I realized that when I have events, activities, or major change products over my career,
Lynn's McNamee disconnected. Ready to pair.
I could always find out that the times that I am struggling the most have always been the times that I have not been able to attribute it to one of my steps being missed. So it's extremely important to understand the importance of steps and the instructions of following those steps and sometimes those steps being missed. So I'll start there and we'll continue to have discussions. It'd be nice if towards the end, if we were able to do a little bit of a breakout group. So it really is going to depend upon our timing and how many questions come up. But it might be nice to see what this might mean to do it from a group perspective. If we're not able to do it, we'll probably do it all together. We'll pick one topic. I always tell people, if you're going to do any suggestions about how to move things along, try and make it real world experience so that it makes it a little bit easier for you. Just so you know, particularly what's the direction that you're going to have. So I'm going to share my screen with you. Then I'll go full screen for you, and then we'll start there. Who can share? Only host. Okay, you should have access to my screen right now, and we'll go ahead. I'll share it for you. Okay, perfect. So let me just make sure that this is accurate here for me. Okay, perfect. Oh, sorry, it's doing that thing again where it's dictating what I'm talking about. So let me just fix that for you. Okay. All right, perfect. So let's just talk a little bit about what it means when we talk about organizations like this. And I'd like to start with this quote. We'll do an adaptive, we'll talk about managing change and next steps, what I just mentioned. I'd like to start with this quote. And this quote is by Charles Darwin. And I'll ask you to use your chat if you can, but I want to say, it says here, it is not the most intellectual of the species that survives. It is not the strongest that survives, but the species that survives is the one that is able to adapt to and to adjust best to the changing environment in which it finds itself. When you see this, other than looking at him with his pretty cool beard that he's got going on, what's some of the first things that come to mind when you see this this statement. So put it in your chat right there, just so if there's one particular word that stands out, or if you want to write a sentence, feel free to put it into your chat. But I'd like to get an idea of what you're thinking when you read this and you see that what Charles Darwin is saying here. And let me read it again. It is not the most intellectual of the species that survives. It is not the strongest that survives, but it's the species that survives. But the species that survives is the one that is able to adapt to and to adjust best to the changing environment in which it finds itself. So any thoughts that people have on that? Well, very nice. What doesn't bend breaks, also known as resilience. It's about changing in the best way possible, even the unknown. Survives is a pretty strong word there also. Very nice. You know, what highlights me is all of the ones that we've been mentioned there, but this right here at the bottom there says, in which it finds itself, right? Right, it's something that we can't control. It's not like we said, oh, it's where we went or what we tried, but it says adjust best to the changing environment in which it finds itself, right? Survival is often dependent on adapting. Nice comment here. How to best adapt to the community needs right now, right? So this is a good way to look at this. When we look at Charles Darwin and he's saying this, it's a pretty interesting way, but it's also the way where we see ourselves right now. So thank you for that. So if I go to the next slide here, let's talk about this complex challenge myth, right? So people often say the better execution and improving operations alone will accomplish the needed results, right? People are often saying, well, if we do it better, if we work harder, we'll get the results we want. Well, that's not always totally the situation, because first of all, you can work extremely hard and you can go nowhere, right? At our events sometimes, and at our change efforts, I say, you know, we can do it the easy way, we can do it the hard way, right? Some of we have to figure out what is gonna be the best strategy to do it. We're gonna get it done. We're resilient organizations, we're resilient individuals, and we work hard. So we'll get it done, but is it gonna be the easy way or is it gonna be the hard way? And that's something that we, you know, just as leaders continually think about here. So what I'll cover with you today is really what it means to be an adaptive organization, and we'll dig down to the adaptive question. It says, good, put your questions in the box. We'll talk about adaptive. So adaptive capacity of an organization refers to adaptive capacity as an organization in response to changed circumstances and survival, and in pursuit of enhanced results, right? So it doesn't say here that it's about the, you know, it's about being the same. It doesn't say about trying to get back to where it is, but it talks about in response to changed circumstances. So being able to respond to changing circumstances, and then also in pursuit of enhanced results. So that leads us directly right here into our first point here that I want to cover about when we talk about this. Anybody who talks about adaptive challenges and technical challenges and adaptive leadership, they all talk about it being two-pronged, really looking at it from your challenges, ways of a technical challenge or an adaptive challenge. A technical challenge often being, as you can see here, something that is easy to identify, right? So often at times people are saying something like, okay, well, payroll didn't get made, right? Oh, let's just add it there. Let's just pay it, right? Or they'll say, oh, this didn't happen. It's like, okay, it's easy, right? Well, sometimes it's not that easy, but a technical challenge is easy to identify. It's often led to quick and concrete solutions, and they can often be, conducted by quickly implemented quickly, right? So it's it's a technical challenge, is easy to identify. So it's easy, like, okay, this is a challenge, let's go. The challenge is that most of us think almost everything is a technical challenge. So we want to figure out, how can we tell if it's a technical challenge, something that's a quick solution. I can even be done by decree, or even be done by something that's a new policy, and let's just get it done, versus an adaptive challenge. So I'll speak a little bit more about that right now here. So the adaptive challenge is going to be something that's very, very, very different, right? So the adaptive challenge is difficult to identify and easy to deny. So often at times people are like, well, it's a challenge, let's just do this, let's just do that. Or rather than thinking it through, people want a quick solution so we can move on. So when leaders are adaptive challenges, they think they in order to understand, they have to get a variety of people involved, looking at different actors, looking at different stakeholders. It also talks about, are we going to do the work here, right? Are we going to commit to doing this and commit to getting this done? It's often at times what you'll hear when you talk about an adaptive challenge, it's the changes in the values, beliefs, roles, relationships, and approaches, right? So it's not something that's just like, okay, this is how we've always done it. You go into it knowing that this is going to cause a significant change, but in order to get there, we're going to have to do the work, and it's going to require changes not just in this one way, but there may be different parts of things that we have to change in order to move our efforts forward. And lastly here, people often resist it. And the reason that people often resist it is because the time that it can take, but also sometimes they don't have the trust available, but also sometimes they know that it cannot be implemented by one party alone. So this is not something where you can say, hey, this is our new policy. It involves so much. So what I'll do is I'll break down what that could be, and I'll give you some best practices for a few points of what adaptive organizations or being prepared to be an adaptive organization looks like. Okay, so in order to be what people talk about the adaptive organization, it has these 4 principles in the literature is what you'll read over and over again. As Laura mentioned early on, there's we're essentially being hit pretty hard here from a nonprofit perspective, and the data is telling us significantly how our organizations are being impacted. What I find is that often at times the people, in order to be an adaptive organization, it starts with the organization's mindset of the team, mindset of who the people are, but it starts with the organization mindset. So what I'll start with is telling you this. If we say, let's hold on tight until we can get through this, our ability to adapt is going to be very different. Let's say if we say, you know what, let's just not think about it now, let's not talk about it right now, it won't be resolved, right? So our mindset has to be not trying to get through it, not trying to ignore it, but how do we come ahead stronger than we've ever been? If I look at that, my discussions, my questions, the way I look at things are different. All the data over history all tells us when you have a major events like this, it does not go back to being the same, right? All the major historical events where something of this magnitude, it does not go back to being the same. So if we say we're going to hold on and think things come back to being the same, you're going to be an organization already behind the 8 ball, because you have to try and figure out how do we get ahead of it and what are we going to look like on the other side, right? Not hanging on, but what are we going to look like on the other side? So I have a few points here for the mindset. So the mindset is the first thing that I mentioned here. Goes beyond survival, goes beyond let's rob Peter to pay Paul. Goes beyond what you have to realize is the decisions that you make now could impact your organization for years to come, right? So am I making them now, or am I making them knowing that the impact of every decision during this time I make is going to be important, right? Peterson asserts that a learning organization is continually expanding its capacity to create its future, right? So how are we going to expand our capacity to create our own future? And again, as that dialogue happens, as we at least look at it from that way, we're going to say we could have the ability to do so much more if we reimagine ourselves on the other side of this. Again, not hanging on for dear life, not figuring out what do we do now just to get past. We don't know how long it's going to be. People, even though we can't see around the corner, we have a bunch of people who require and expect us to know what's around that corner. So to be good stewards of our organization's funds and to be good, positive leaders in an environment that's so uncertain, there are some thought processes that I think are important. Also, what you have to realize is organizations that are structured, regimented, and routinized, they are often less resilient and less able to adapt, right? So often at times, smaller organizations, let's go, let's move. Larger organizations, it just takes a little bit more to turn. We look at it like it's almost like a ship, right? If you have a huge ship and you start turning, it's going to turn slowly. So how do we know that? If we know that our organizations are large and we know that change is hard for our organization, what are we putting in place to manage that change? What change philosophy are we following? So these are some of the things that you want to start with, but it does start with the mindset. right? And so that normally the question is, well, how do we get our team into that adaptive mindset? So we'll talk about that a little on Thursday from a leadership perspective, and we'll talk a little bit about this today when we go through some of the other sections here. So the first one was the organization's mindset, right? The mindset also is looking at how you as an individual defines resource development. Organizations that have been adaptive and have had success during these times, there have been a lot of different strategies that people have used, and we can continue to talk about this in a little bit with questions, but they just don't see resource development as finances alone, right? So they see resource development as finances in one, but they also see socially, they also see their marketing, right? They also see their analysis as a resource. Then they see their services as a resource. So usually it's money and services, but people here who see it through this lens see it a little bit more broadly. Advocacy also being important, right? Often at times people are advocating when it's budget time, it's time for the end of the year time, people are starting to advocate for funding and systems, but people find that those organizations that are successful in times like these, they ramp up their advocacy efforts. Just as much as your organization, decisions you make impact you for years to come, the decisions that people who fund, decisions that public entities make now, have an impact on our future as well, right? So we want to make sure that we're providing an environment that people understand that advocacy is not something that we put to the side. It's actually something that we ramp up during uncertain times. So the next step here in this process is this inquisitiveness. Looking at this in a way where we can say, okay, let's take a look at this, creating a culture of inquiry that allows every voice to be heard. So I refer to a culture of inquiry, and we have some checklists on that, as opportunities where people feel comfortable enough to talk, comfortable enough to speak up. I was speaking to a police chief, a local police chief, and she was saying that she, in this webinar format, she was saying that she spoke to every police officer of color in her area, and she found that it was amazing what she learned from them, how they're being treated in the department, how they're being treated out of the apartment, outside of uniform. And she says she learned so much. One, she was brought to tears. Two, she learned so much that she could help change the way her organization goes. I applaud her for that. The second questions that adaptive organizations have to ask ourselves is, why didn't we already have a system in place where that information comes out, right? Why do we have to wait for bigger things to come out to pull that information out? So why don't we have systems in place to do that? So creating a culture of inquiry where people feel and understand the importance of being able to speak up, knowing that their voices are heard, but from an adaptive organization standpoint, it cannot be done with a few of us at the leadership team saying, how about this, how about that? It's done at all levels of the organization, regardless of ranking. We want to be able to ask people, we want to be able to get the good data, we want to be able to use that, we want to be able to seek out good data. So that's an important thing, is how is my level of inquiry? Questions of culture of inquiry could be, do all voices feel like they're being heard? Are we thinking about what does it look like from the outside? So often at times there's people who talk to us, everybody around the same table, we've been doing this for a number of years together, so we all shake our heads okay. So rather than going to the next item, I often say, okay, I'm glad we all agree. But if somebody was not going to agree, what would they say? If somebody was not going to agree, what would they say? I want those questions asked at our table rather than having somebody else ask us outside. So how do we have those discussions? We create this environment where people know they can ask, and we also know that we have to seek out if we really want to figure out how do we address this issue. How do we tackle this issue? And then we also understand that the culture that values the process of self-evaluation. So if we say that we're going to try a new initiative, or we're going to think this through, what does it look like for us? And what is the data that we're going to use to measure that? Many people who are either in the strategic planning process or just finished the strategic planning process, this is going to throw your process off. This is going to throw your strategy off. You have to reconvene that group. And you may have to adjust what some of your measurements are. How will we know we are where we say we are? How do we know where we want to get, right? What are we going to get? What is it going to look like when we get there? Once you're able to figure that part out, you're able to paint a picture for your teams and staff. Once you're able to paint that picture, Kuz and Posner often say is that this is that a shared vision for the future. So people don't see it as just your vision, but they see it as the shared vision, but also opportunities for you to rely on your core values and make your core values come alive through processes like this. And if you don't have core values that you have established, this is the time where leadership emerges. This is where the core values are ever more important now, because people are going to say to you, are we saying what we say we're going to do, or do we believe what we say? So I believe core values are decision-making tools. And if you don't have them, there's plenty of things on the internet can help facilitate that. And you can reach out to us at the Institute as well to provide some of that support. But the core values are important. The leaders that come out of this will be incredible, but it'll be stronger as well also. And as you know, often at times is when you face a trial or tribulation where the true leadership emerges, but also where you're able to identify sometimes who's in your corner, who are putting it all in for you also, but also how prepared my organization is to get through this. Wow, we were extremely prepared or we were woefully prepared. But this is that opportunity for you to identify that. So I think that that's important when we look at it that way. The other one is that you'll often hear is about this disequilibrium and what adaptive learning means. These are all adaptive leadership principles. I try and put it into a framework for you so you're able to say, okay, this is what I see. So from this perspective, often at times, as I'll explain this to you, it looks pretty ugly, but I'll explain it to you. And if you've seen it before, you'll get a chance. This is from Heifetz and Linsky. People often call Heifetz, Ron Heifetz, the father of the adaptive leadership. This Leadership on the Line book is an incredible book. It's a good resource for you to look at. So let's say that we're talking about meetings or structures here. This gray spot right here that we have here, I want to call like that. That's your magic area. So let's say if we're all in a meeting and we're talking about magic and we're talking about great things and this is important for us. When challenges that are often coming up, if it's a technical challenge, it's easy. I can make that decision pretty quickly. We're done, let's go. It doesn't take a lot of time. But when it's an adaptive challenge, it's going to take some work. And often at times it's going to take a little bit of time. So in order for me to do that, what I have to do is I want to stay in this magic zone so we're able to resolve it. One way to stay in that magic zone is to make sure that you understand that if everybody's having a good old time and they're down here, maybe the work is not getting done. But if I push too hard, I go beyond their limit of tolerance and people become frustrated. So I want to be in this productive zone. So when we're not asking the question, sometimes a hard question will get us back in that productive zone without pushing too much. I'll give you an example. If somebody's just, they're having a good old time and I'm going to ask a hard question, well, what does this mean if we have to close our doors down? Often at times, those questions are going to keep us in this productive zone. Now, if you had to go to a meeting and you knew somebody was going to ask you a lot of questions, what do? You prepare more. So the fact is that putting people in this productive zone, sometimes even that person who I feel is like my arch enemy is always asking me questions, I prepared more. So I'm in that productive zone. How do we keep our organizations within that productive zone where people don't check out because they feel like they're being pushed too hard and they're in this limit, outside of the limit of tolerance, or if they feel like the threshold of change is not reached and there's no reason really for it. So you want to figure out, how do I push people into a productive zone, so in a way that they feel like they are available and can move a process forward. And that's one way to do that, is by looking at that, to be in that zone of disequilibrium. So name the elephant in the room. Right. Often at times people talk about, we want to do this, we want to do that, we're going to do this, but they often at times don't think about what is their own capacity to do that. I think that there's thinking about this in the confines of what can we do, but there's also thinking about it in the confines of, okay, let's change the world, and you're by yourself. Can you change the world by yourself? Yes, it's going to take a lot longer than if you had a group of people. So if I'm looking at my organization, I'm saying to myself, what are our organization's strengths? What are our organization's competitive advantage? I know that if we lean on our strengths and or competitive advantage, that's our sweet spot, our space we're more likely to be successful, right? If you're able to that. So what are our organization's strengths? What are the strengths of our team members, right? Different ways to kind of like look at that. Where are our areas of growth, right? We're not going to lean into an area that we've never been in before because it's not our strength. We're not going to go somewhere where we've struggled as much because that may or may not be our areas of growth. But again, we want to ask ourselves that question before we start taking actions. Organizations have done a number of different things. If you look at the literature, some have cut programs back, some have fired staff, some have moved to different areas of work. And which one are they? Which one is the best? You are the best person, and your organization is the best organization that can make that decision. You know your people, you know your strengths, you know your areas of growth, you know your people, you know your community, right? What this does is it adds one more tool to your tool belt with an understanding that sometimes when I'm faced with a challenge, it's a lot harder to deal with than just making a quick decision, right? And a lot of times it has to be asked of people. Sometimes people will come to me and say, oh, what do you think we should do here? It's so much easier for me to say, just do this, just do that. But sometimes I don't know if it's a technical challenge or an adaptive challenge either. So what I'll respond by saying is, well, what do you think? Well, they say, I don't know. Okay, good. When you have the opportunity, why don't you sit down, think about it, and then come back, right? Giving our people opportunities to dig a little bit deeper, but giving myself an opportunity to dig deeper rather than making a quick off the top decision. Because we know that one time we can identify it, but if we don't address it sometimes, it can go into a different direction. The next step here is the life cycle placement. For many of you who've been either through my trainings or USDs, we often talk about the life cycle of an organization. And I think that this is important because this helps you understand exactly where you're at and what your needs are. And I'll explain this in a little bit more detail. So this is organizational life cycles. It's a startup phase, adolescent phase, mature, stagnant, defunct. Now, just like human development, the startup is often seen as early on, infant, baby here. And then there's an adolescent phase. We don't talk to an adolescent the way we talk to a baby, right? It's the old adage, what got us here won't get us there. So we have to ask ourselves, what is it that we need right now sometimes to deal with this adaptive challenge? We already know who we have, we might know our community, but we might need more to deal with this adaptive challenge. And if we are planning on dealing with the adaptive challenge in that way, what is it that we need to do? Now, often at times people say, well, I just want to sustain. Well, we have to realize that if we're at the sustain phase and we don't do something to renew, you're at risk of decline or dissolution. So what are we going to do to renew ourselves? So you don't have to be at sustain and then decline. You can renew at any point in time. And this is age independent. So what happens is that you could be around 100 years and be at startup, right? You could be around 50 years and still be at startup, or you can be around for a few years and you're at the growth phase. It's really going to be identifying where you are, because if I know where I am, I know what my capacity is often at times to deal with an adaptive challenge or to deal with any challenge that we're facing, because our needs are going to be different, right? In the future, our needs are going to be different. What we have to deal with on the other side of this is going to be different. What are going to be our needs to get there? Are we using this as an opportunity to find ourselves in the decline phase, or are we using this as an opportunity to renew and keeping our sights on our future? Asking ourselves and asking our teams that. One thing that I do is I often ask our team, this happened to be a board of directors, I ask them each to take a green dot and a blue dot. And on the green dot, what they're going to do is they're going to tell us where the organization is, where they feel the organization is, and then the blue dot, where they feel the team is. So where do I feel my board and or my leadership team is, and where do I feel my organization is? If we were able to have a dialogue in more detail, I'd probably say, okay, tell us what are some of the things you see by this. Often at times people will say, well, it seems like they're not on the same page. It seems like it's going to be hard for them to move away. Well, I see a few positive things here. The first thing I see here is that there is alignment. Most of the blue dots are together. Most of the green dots are together. That's alignment. You know how hard it is often at times to get people aligned, moving in the right direction? So this is going to be that. Other thing is people often talk about, well, who in the world would put that blue dot there? This is that blue dot. Who is it? Who is it? What's going on? So you spend all your time talking about this one blue dot when everybody else is over here and ready to move, right? So I tell people, as researchers do often at times, they throw out the outliers, right? Doesn't mean they're not important, but they throw them out so they don't distract from you. So if I'm able to do that, what I'm able to see here is that if I'm looking at a team in this way, often at times an organization is on decline, back to the human development analogy, I often want an adolescent phase group of people helping us move or turn an organization around. When I have people who are adolescent, adolescents take risk. Adolescents often at times have a little bit more energy to move along. Sometimes, right? So I'm gonna try and figure out how do I get my team here? Now, again, doesn't mean that I have a bunch of adolescents on my board or adolescents on my team, but I know that my team mindset often at times has to be in the phase where we realize we are gonna have to do something different. We're gonna have to look at ourselves from a renewal. We're gonna have to ask ourselves, what is it we need to do to get this organization to the next step or to turn around a declining organization? And the models help people identify these in the area. So I think that that's pretty a good way to look at it. I keep looking at the chat because I want to make sure everybody's good in good space and you understand what we're going here. We're about 20 minutes short of this, so I think we're perfect on time. I just want to make sure that we stay on track. Adaptive organizations are innovative organizations. Often at times when people come in and they say, hey, we really gonna have to do something significant. We really have to change things around. So I'm like, okay, well, is everything off the table? Well, they're like, no, not everything's off the table. Then you're limiting my thinking often. Now, does that mean that we can't have the conversation? It means we can, but sometimes you wanna make sure that your adaptive challenges, often at times, you have to take your limiters off. Right? Doesn't mean that you can't shoot down things, but you don't want to limit your groups to let's just be within this little box, right? So innovation, you're committing staff time and financial resources to thoughtful experimentation, and being sure to reward both successes and failures. We're going to try things. Sometimes they're going to be great. We're going to try things. Sometimes they're not going to be so great. Oftentimes they talk about people in experimentation having several different biology projects going on at the same time. We're working on all these different things at the same time so we can identify and test what's going to be the best thing for us versus putting all of our marbles in one basket, say we're only going to do this. So they're looking at that and figuring out what is going on. One measurement would be committing your staff time and financial resources to it. Let's say for some odd reason that some group says we're going to work on DEI stuff. Well, sorry, let's say that they were working on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives for the last 3 years. So I would say, wow, that's great. You've been working on it for the last 3 years. So I'd ask, well, how much staff time did you put towards that? How many financial resources did you put towards that? If you want to change in something, you measure it, right? So the question is that if people are saying that they want to see a change in something, but they can't tell you how much committed staff time do they put toward and/or financial resources, why would you expect the change to occur? So those are measurement principles in that realm. So promoting, the next one is promoting organizational diversity. All of the data tells us if you have the slightest bit of diversity on your team, again, beyond ethnic diversity, it could be diversity of thought, diversity of opinion, diversity of experience, all right? Age diversity, right? All of these things, the little bit of diversity, often at times teams flourish. So if you want your team to flourish, you want them to be diverse enough where you have a diversity of opinion, thought, people in the room who you can now say, we have a true understanding of this, but we also have the innovative thinkers and different people at the same time. So it's not like just, oh, I agree and everybody else agrees, let's move on. It's pushing the envelope a little. And as a team, I have to be prepared for that. Different people who I want at the table may not be like me. They may not speak like me. They may not do things the way I think that we used to do them. But often at times, those are the same people that are going to carry your organization forward. And you as an organization have to be open to that, right? A commitment to seeding the organization environment with new ideas and influences. Where are we getting our ideas from? Where are we getting our influences from? And sometimes it's letting go of old ways. Sometimes we have a habit of keeping on to old things just because they are special. Sometimes they are the founder's project, or sometimes they've been around for so long And the reality is that you may have to give up on some of these holding on to old ways. And I heard somebody even say, I think it was Dr. Dietrich said, well, maybe you should use this as an opportunity to get rid of that old program that you've been trying to get rid of for the last 5 years, right? So you can look at it also as initiating change to improve performance and embrace its response. So improving performance and embracing its response. Right. So looking at whatever we do, however we do it, what is the response to that? Do we have to embrace that in a way, and how are we measuring it to ensure that we are moving in that direction? Do you lead, one of the questions here is, do you lead the reinvention? Doesn't that save time, or do you take the time to let the board to find their way on their own? Extremely good question. I often at times say is that you cannot lead almost any of these projects alone. What you can do is do the research. You can also bring some ideas to the table, but often at times, if you're leading it alone, I feel like you're going to be carrying it alone all the way through. What you want to do is that you want to get everybody involved as possible, but sometimes you get everybody involved just with gathering the data, and then you have to make the final decision. That's different, but just gathering the data yourself and making the decision yourself, sometimes, one, you're taking your eyesight off the bigger picture. Two, you're not getting that buy-in by involving others. And then lastly, sometimes in order to do the work, it takes the time, and it also takes the commitment to working with others and bringing all ideas, thoughts to the table. And so now from a board's perspective specifically, let's say it's like, hey, I got 10 board members, 15 board members, and I can't even get them in the room at the same time, particularly during this time. Some people have formed subcommittees that work on this. So it's still, it could be you as doing this along with the subcommittee. But I find that when there's a subcommittee, the board often at times of their peers, they know that they're ready to move forward. But that's a great question. But I do believe that that's important. And when I talk about change in a little bit here in the last minutes here, you'll see there's an important phase of that in the change process also. So I use Cotter's 8-step change process that I feel is important. And as I mentioned earlier, every time I thought that I have not successfully done a change effort, it's always been because I've missed one of these steps, right? So I have had this book. Cotter wrote this book for a number of years ago. I want to say I might have had this book over 15 years. Right now, of course, he's done different, they've added some things. Most of these are still the principles are the same. They've changed some words, but I like it the way you see it here and the way that you'll have it as you receive my handouts for this. So there's 3 major steps here, right? Creating the climate for change, of course, engaging and enabling the organization, and implement and sustain that change. So these are the 3 buckets that make sense, and we can all agree that if we are leading any change effort, and those buckets make sense. The question here is, how do you get there, right? So the first one is establishing a sense of urgency. People will not change if there's no reason to. Oh, I think it's a good idea. Well, go ahead, change, right? Often at times, Fortune 500 companies will say, we lost 10% of our earnings last year. We have to change. 10%, they spend more than 10% everywhere else, but they want people to know that there's a sense of urgency. There's a need for change, right? In this environment, we know there's a need for change already, but sometimes there's a need for change. The second one is building my guiding team. If I'm going to do this change, I often at times can't do it by myself. I can't make the assumption that only the board or only this team is the team that's going to help me move this through. So sometimes I might have a naysayer that's going to be on that guiding team because I want that naysayer to ask those questions before somebody else does. I might have some people who are going to carry this work forward on that team. I know that everybody listens to John or Sue. I might have them on our team, but it's like, who do I put on this guiding team that are going to help you make this successful, right? And often at times we make the assumption it'll just be the leadership team, but the leadership team sometimes doesn't have to carry it. So you want to try and get that guiding team, the specific people at the table. The other thing you want to do is you want to establish the vision. What is it that you're trying to accomplish? How can you paint that vision in a way that you know what you're trying to accomplish and it's easy to talk to who's trying to accomplish? I find sometimes if you have to take more than a few minutes to explain it to me, it's probably not clear vision, right? You want to make sure it's a clear vision so people know where we're going. They say if you paint a clear vision, people will follow you anywhere, right? You have to have that vision painted out there for them. Right? One of the great orators of our day, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., when he talks about what he wanted to see, he says, little black boys or little white girls, right? He was painting this picture so people could visualize what they were going, what was coming, or what he wanted, or what he saw. So if I ask you right now, how are you explaining to people what you want, what you see, where you come out of this, where you want your organization to be? I didn't say how you're going to get there yet. I'm talking about just establishing that vision sometimes. You might have the data already, you might have pulled some of the meetings already, but right now the question really is that how do people know where you're going? Often at times I talk to people, hey, how does your staff doing? How does your staff know what's going on? They'll say something to the effect of, well, they know, everybody's watching the news, everybody's watching this. And it's like, no, you need to tell them. They need to know that you are thinking about them, you are on their side, even though everybody knows what's going on. If they're a team member, family member, team member, you want to make sure that they are kept in the loop sometimes of what's going on, but also over communicating. This is not a time to under communicate. This is not a time to make assumptions. You have to over communicate so people know this is where we stand. This is what we're doing now. That goes into that the fourth point there, communicating for buy-in, right? So if I did it by myself, if it comes down for the top only, people are going to say, well, that's great. It sounds good, but they may not embrace it as much as if they bought into it. So for examples, I've known people to start some core value discussions at the board level, and then they hand it down to staff and they say, these are our core values for the organization. And then people say, that's their values, not ours, right? We live by sometimes a different set of values. And also, if it was gonna be our values, we would have added this. So figuring out how do we engage people at all levels so that it's this, they can communicate for buy-in and they understand. So empower broad-based action, allowing and enable authorization. So people are like, this is a good idea, but I got to run it up to change 3 levels in order to do anything. So you want to like show that this team, this guiding team, this organization, that they understand the parameters somewhat that you have to let them operate under, but you're enabling the ability for them to do that work, enabling power. They feel enabled to do it. That's also another who's imposing a thing, enabling others for action. The other thing is creating short-term wins. People have to see movement. If they don't see movement, this is where sometimes it stalls. Hey, we started out with some good energy initially, but then things just got stuck. Often at times people need to see some wins. So often at times, sometimes I get, if I'm doing a $250,000 campaign and somebody early on, somebody gives me $10,000, I don't announce, depending upon the amount of the money that I'm raising, I don't announce big gifts pretty early on, because what happens is somebody will say, oh, we before we even got started or 1 week in, we've got a $20,000 gift. Well, the reality is some people say, oh, well, they're getting money, let's just see how it works out. Whereas if I announce that we have a $20,000 gift with permission of the donor, a month and maybe a month and a half, and it might re-energize people. So figuring out what are some ways that we can have short-term wins during this change process. How do I let people know what we're doing with our staff during this time? How do people see that there's movement? How do people know what we're doing for our population and our people, right? I know when I was stuck and when I was having hard times with things, the organizations or the people that were able to be there for me, communicated with me, let me know that they were thinking about me, are the ones to this day I continue to stay. I'm faithful to them. Right? Because when in my time, when I needed something, they were faithful to me and they were in my side and I knew that. So creating those short-term wins is going to be important. And then making it stick, right? Oh, it sounds like it's good. We can take that. No, you wanted to make it part of your culture, right? So you're going to make it, doing things to make it stick, following up. You're going to put teams in front of you. You're going to continue to keep an eye on it. You're going to continue to measure it. So you can figure out, how do I move these things in a direction that people see it and it's embedded in what we do, and it's part of a change process that I know about. And again, my biggest thing sometimes has been communicating for buy-in, because sometimes we're rushing. Sometimes it's been making sure that create the short-term wins. I might think it's a win, I might know it's a win, but people don't know it's a win. Like, they have to know that this is energetic and it's moving forward, and then don't ease up. There were times up until the very last moment when I said, there's no way we're making this goal, and we're gonna have to figure out ways to tell people that we're not gonna hit this goal. But people, at the last minute, something will come through and give us a big enough gift that it rolls over. And they said to me, The reason that we kind of stuck this out is because we knew that you believed it was going to happen, right? Now, I told you I started thinking some doubt about it, but people saw that it wasn't me easing up, and it wasn't me easing up at stages, but it was a belief that we could change, a belief that we could get there. And I think that that's often the times that people kind of like need to see that. Now, sometimes it's stressful at an organization and taking the helm. The University of San Diego's Nonprofit Institute has been offering some free resilience coaching for executive directors and people who are in need of some of these services during this time. Sometimes you just need a thought partner, right? Sometimes it's hard as an executive director and or manager and or director to gripe up and gripe down, right? You don't feel like, I don't feel comfortable telling the board everything. I don't feel comfortable griping down to some of my my employees, my leaders also. We have set that up to establish that, knowing that a coaching program and or coaching could be the key to getting you the resources that you need or helping you think through something. And then the last one is anchor change in culture. How do I reinforce it? How do I enter it into our culture? How do I make it part of who we are? In order to do that, I have to sometimes put systems in place, but also sometimes I just have to speak to it so that people understand that this is important work that we're doing, and this is how we drive organizations forward. So I'll stop right there just so that I can open up some questions, and we'll have a few minutes here, about 8 minutes for questions. And then what we'll do is we'll spend a little bit more time afterwards. They call it after hours. I can stay back a little bit to answer some more questions for you. I'm hoping that this was helpful for you. Sometimes when you're able to see it in diagrams, you're able to have a little bit of nuggets. I'm excited about Thursday because we're going to talk about what do I do to take on this. But for now, I think we have a good opportunity to look at it from an organizational community perspective. So any questions that we have right now, I can help, or Cynthia, if anybody wants to kind of jump in and help. But any questions? No question's a bad question. If you need to be specific or anything, please let me know, and I'll be able to answer some of those questions for you.
Lynn, we don't have any questions at the moment. Did you want to open it up to where people can raise their hand and ask questions?
Of course, yeah, of course.
Okay.
But
So,
if they, go ahead.
I was gonna say, if that's what you wanted, anyone who would like to ask Lynn a question, please feel free to use the raise hand, blue hand icon, and we'll open it up so that you can talk with Lynn.
I've also, here I've added some, under each of these bullets, I've added some questions that you can ask yourself. How do I establish a sense of urgency? How do I establish or build a guiding team? Who would you choose to be part of the coach to help champion the change? So this gives you some of these ways to look at things. 1, 2, 3, 4, how do you communicate for buy-in? What are we gonna do to remove some of the obstacles and create short wins? So it kind of just helps walk you through some of these steps. How do we make it stick? What are some questions that we can ask ourselves? So these are just a couple of ways to do it. If you want to raise your hand or ask some questions, feel free at this time. If you want to figure out, okay. So what are the signs that you have reached the limit of tolerance in a group? Good question. So often at times, and I'm assuming that you're really referring to the adaptive learning part. So how do I know that the signs of tolerance? Often at times, it's that groups that when sometimes it's that natural stuff. You start seeing people lean back. You start people not commenting. You start people being disengaged. You start finding that things that were supposed to be done at certain times are not done. You often at times, people walk into a room and you can tell that something's not right. It's all of those things that need to be addressed, but also when people sometimes have reached their level of tolerance. Other times, there's a lot of people who don't hide that they've reached their level of tolerance, and then often at times you might think it's something different, but making your group understand how important it is to let us know that information and creating that culture of inquiry is gonna be pretty important. And Matt, if you wanna ask that differently, if I didn't answer it, please feel free to do so. My organization has decided to eliminate the ED position to save money. My position to be transparent. How do I convince the board to look beyond cutting costs and look at creating revenue? Your presentation has been the best. Thank you for that. We are excited to always hear that this is helpful. Sometimes, like, from this side of it, I say, hey, they don't have any questions. They don't like me. I'm gonna go home and cry, right? But the reality here is that we appreciate your thoughts and the work that we do. This is a hard one, right? Because think about it this way: often at times, the highest paid employee, the employee that they feel like, oh, we can take this on, that's the employee they're saying, well, we can save a lot of money immediately, right? That is not often at times forward thinking, right? I often at times have told people, you give up a building before you give up your people, right? Right now, everybody's home, right? We're still getting stuff done. If we're able to get stuff done, do we need the traditional form? The other thing is that I ask myself, if people are going to look at me that easily, what did I do that I could do better to prove my value, to prove my worth, right? And one of that things is that constantly ongoing, think about that. I tell people, if there's a 4-person team here, I want to perform at the top, 10%, because I don't want to be part of that group that's seen as, well, they're not as powerful as the rest. I'm very concerned about this situation when a board says, this is where we are and this is our only situation, because it makes me feel that this was an adaptive challenge and it was so easy to do the first technical response. Save money, do this, right? So I do think that, so how do I convince a board to that? The first one, and Laura's gonna jump in and ask some questions, answer some of this, but one way I think of having the board perceive this a little bit differently is, 1, having the data. 2, before you're eliminating position, let's give us some time to explore some of the options, because we often at times in this world don't do this work for the money alone. We do this work because we believe that we can often at times get further along. The other thing is that let's put your money where your mouth is. Let's say that we're gonna come up with this idea, we're gonna put X amount of dollars towards it, and we're gonna move this direction in the right direction, versus that being our only option. Again, an adaptive challenge requires a different way of thinking. And I can tell you, usually the finance people, their job is not to dig too deep into it. Their job is to say, let's make these numbers make sense. And nonprofits, our measurement is not money alone, right? And sometimes money is not the deciding factor that's gonna make sense. So Laura, were you gonna jump in and say something else?
Yeah, I couldn't help myself, right? So
yes, I knew that.
This is an interesting, Tricia, you bring up a really interesting point. So I'm gonna just tell you what I've observed with some boards that we've been working with over the last couple of months, is that there's this real mentality, this is natural reaction to some of this, right? Which is, we're gonna hunker down, we're gonna retrench, we're gonna weather the storm. But if you look at what Lynn was talking about, and you look at the data, the storm, hunkering down and doing nothing and hoping that everything is just gonna be the same when we emerge from everything that's going on right now, is just folly, right? So everything that's being written about the nonprofit sector right now is about new ways of operating, new ways of innovating. So if you remove the person who can innovate for you, and hope that just you're gonna weather the storm in a very technical way, like Lynn talked about, that's problematic. So I don't know that this will help you in your situation in your board right now, but the other component that I think is critical is that you come with the solutions. So boards need their CEOs not to tell them what to do, but to show them the list of possibilities and to create like the sense of urgency. But if you can't just come and say, that's short-sighted. You got to come and say, here's how we're going to develop those additional resources. Here is my plan, right? Because that lowers the anxiety level on the board and they feel more confident. And it may not work in this scenario, but I think that there's definitely, boards need leaders on them right now that are moving beyond that hunkering down and weathering the storm mindset. We gotta lean in, dig in, whatever metaphor you want to use.
And again, Tricia, I appreciate your openness. There's also the opportunity to, again, talk to one of our resilience coaches.
I think that would be great.
Kind of think through this a little bit. But I'd say this, first of all, board members and organizational leaders sometimes will say, first of all, we all are aware that we have to figure out how to cut. I don't want anybody to say that, hey, I'm telling everybody you can't. You do have to make decisions. You do have to make adaptive decisions, but I'm saying that I want everybody to consider everything on the front end so that we can do that. Now, if we want to change it, right? I think that one thing that we can do is we can, one, put the data forward, but two, make people recognize when you're cutting people, you're also cutting the relationships that people have, that person has developed. So the question here is that you may think that you're saving a little bit, but you're hurting yourself moving forward, right? So it will change. Yeah, some of this stuff may not change, but I do think that sometimes if I'm thinking about something and I see a path forward, helping people to see that either through writing it down or scheduling something or helping people see that sometimes in context is so much better, because organizations are hurt more so when there's not leadership at the helm and they don't recover as quickly. So, but I'm hoping that's helpful. And I mean, I think a great question, and I appreciate the space that allows questions like that to come up. So, so thank you. Now, I do know it's a little after one. I want to be respectful for people's time. Is there, thank you. Anyone else that would like to have a question, or anybody else want to stay to after hours? After hours can go from 1 o'clock to 1:15 if you'd like. If you want to kind of like hang out, if you want to have virtual coffee, if you want to.
We are officially in after hours, which sounds like there should be some kind of really special thing.
So I can't see the groups here, so let me.
I would just issue a reminder for anyone that came on later, is that we will be doing the second part of this on Thursday, not Friday, and you should get a notification of that.
Yeah, so I don't see any other questions, Laura. I see that we have 17 participants still here. Thanks, have a great week. Same to you all. Hope to see you on Thursday.
Oh, here we go. Extra bonus.
Those who want to execute in their business as usual, and resilient. Looking forward to sharing some takeaways with our leadership team in a sensitive way. Yeah, sensitive. You know, one thing that I didn't mention that I think is essential in a lot of this work is it's a time for compassion. Right? We do this work because of the love and compassion that we have. And I like what you're saying here as far as you're bringing it to your leadership team in a sensitive way. And I know if you have to jump off, that's great. I hope to see you again, Erin. I think, Erin, we've met before. So I do think that there are opportunities to understand what people are going through. We don't know what they're going through. This time for us is significant in so many different ways, and it's tremendously emotional. For our teams, for our staff, for our people. So I want to not discount that at all. But we do this work for the love of the game, essentially. So we need to continue to do that and understand and respect the people who are doing this work under dire circumstances, or their backs are against the wall. We do know this, that the average nonprofit in this area has probably 1.5 months of reserves. We are past that 1.5 months. For those who did go to their reserves, we're past that 1.5 months. We have never thought we'd have to ask ourselves, well, what do we do when our reserves are up? Because we never thought they would be, we thought they'd be building. But again, this is the time for you to really dig deep, really look at your resources, really look at your teams, really look at your community. I've seen organizations I was in Sacramento during the recession, 2008. To 2012, I believe, and I saw some organizations partner like I've never seen before, right? So that would be a good thing. Cynthia, if you don't mind, can you put in the email for the resources for the pro bono support, the resilience coaching, if you don't mind?
Horizons.
It's on our website, but we'll also put it in this chat so that you can have it. I'm glad we're looking forward to Thursday. That's going to be exciting. I get passionate about this stuff, but I also get emotional about it because I being a former executive director, being a coach and all that other stuff, I work with it, firsthand often. So, well, okay. I think we're in good shape here, Laura. We'll go ahead and post this in the box. Please visit our website for other resources. We have a Facebook group that has some other resources that people are sharing. So As much as we can help, or any ideas that you think that we can help. We have all of these series of Fortify available for people to watch. I sometimes tell your team to watch it and then come back and discuss it together. We also have the Nonprofit Academy that's on YouTube, where we talked about resources, small business administration, workforce partnership, thinking about your teams differently. We talked race and diversity. So we had all of these discussions just a short period of time. If you go to YouTube and look up the City of San Diego Nonprofit Academy, that'll be good. And thank you very much, Cynthia, for putting the link to those resources there. I mentioned it a couple of times just because I believe in the power of coaching and the power of teamwork also. So thank you all very much. All right, thank you. Bye now.
Bye.